Welcome back to the channel. My name is Winter, and we are on the third installment of my essay series revisiting the works of my undergraduate years. And today we're going to discuss why Black children are an endangered species. So, Black children are an endangered species. In America, it seems that the Black child's introduction to adulthood is bearing witness to horrific events, even within their own home or outside of it. Black children are subjected to a unique kind of violence being born in America, and it is something that follows them throughout their lives into adulthood. Black children are an endangered species because very few exist. Black children do not intimately know the freedom of childhood. Many Black children experience violence at such young ages that they are forcibly made aware of how evil the world can be. One of the first ways a Black child experiences violence is through language. Yes. One of the first ways a Black child experiences violence is through language. Many of the children murdered were referred to as young men, which is inaccurate and violent. A boy the age of 12 isn't a man. He's a boy who has been murdered by a man. What Southern writers have made me more aware of is the language used to discuss Black children. It isn't the same language used to discuss white children or any other non-Black child. What this does is it creates people who, when they see a Black child, they don't see a child, but just a smaller version of an adult. So whatever is done to that child is okay because it isn't as if they've hurt a child. They've just hurt another Black body. Black children experience what Black women do with the plight of womanhood. They aren't afforded it. But see, Black men are men. Black women are not women like white women are. And Black children aren't children at all. What Black children witness when they experience violence forever changes them, and sometimes it kills them because it is their only way to escape the pain. Black children are the victims of violence down to every road they take. Baldwin said of the Atlanta child murders, the murdering of a child is a sexual performance, and that whomever murdered the child was some desperate person. And this is, I believe, true. Rape is not about the sexual act, but about the power. Murder is the exact same. It isn't the death of the person that the murderer relishes in, but it is the power they had over that person's life in the moments right before their death. When murdering a Black child, a person is performing what I'd argue the most American perverse act that there is. And I argue this because of what I have learned from reading the various Southern authors in this class. In Alice Walker's short story, The Flowers, a male lynched Black body is left out for anyone to stumble upon, even a little girl. This is exactly what happens. Myop, Walker's main character, finds a decaying lynched Black body. And in that moment, she can't be a child anymore. And Witness understands that. Her laying down flowers at the sight of this discarded body is her acknowledgement that not only something violent has taken place to another person, but that something violent has happened to her. Bearing witness. Lynched bodies were kept hanging or out in fields because whiteness wants Black children to see them. Whiteness wants to strip Black children of childhood, to be subjected to such violent scenes so that they can't ever enjoy childhood. Myop will forever be left with the memory of what happened to her in the same way that the siblings, parents, aunt, uncles, and every Black person aware of the Atlanta child murders will be of that event. Leaving Atlanta does not hold back with its examples of violence against youth. Tayar Jones, Leaving Atlanta, explores the trauma that witnessing was and is for Black children. A young boy chooses the unknown danger of a van over the known danger of home. The children in the story watch their friends vanish before them. These children witness their parents being unable to protect them, not only due to their own interior issues, but because of poverty, race, gender, and more. Children who shouldn't be seeing anything other than a world full of opportunity see the opposite. And it is this that hardens them. The novel chronicles the experiences of the children left in the wake of disaster. What is left to interpretation of the reader is what the children will do with their witness, what they will become after witnessing, or if they'll just be paralyzed. When the Atlanta child murders began, the news had been flooded with the story of Black children across America were forced to witness horrors they should have never been able to imagine. When examining the Atlanta child murders, the children outside of Atlanta and the effect that the murders had on them is ignored. And this, I argue, is because when we think of who witnesses, what we forget is how tools like the television made Black children outside of the nearly 30 Black children who have been murdered witness to such a horrific fate. Witnesses are far and wide, and what happens after bearing witness depends on the interiority of the person or child. Memory is a large theme in Southern texts that explore how violence impacts children. Layman's Heavy uses memory as a tool to explore what repeated violence can do to a Black child as they try to become a Black adult. The recounting of the abuse, physical, sexual, and emotional, that this overweight Black boy in the South experiences demands a reflection on both the author's part and the reader. To ignore his witness testaments, though often depicted in an uncomfortable way, would be to deny one's own role of witness. Heavy's main character is once told by his mother, when he is a child, not even 10 years old, to act as her husband, not to be the man of the house, but to act as her husband, which is sexually deviant and violent because it strips him of his childhood. It is in that very moment he is made aware of his position in this household. He's barely 10 and he's not a child, and he cannot be a child. And the trauma repeats as he is made to sleep in the bed with his mother and operate as a husband in every way only short of being sexually abused by his mother. Yet he is sexually abused by another woman. This child experiences so much violence in his life that he cannot forget that it is entirely responsible for who he becomes as an adult. In Heavy, a child is witness to his mother's dysfunction and the dysfunction of others to the point where he has to exist in chaos until he can escape to college and begin to repair himself. Black children don't know childhood. Childhood is a luxury, and Heavy does a great job at communicating this. It is uncomfortable to read. It is uncomfortable to witness as a reader, to see the words written on the page because it is true. There are more children existing in the fictional world of Heavy than there are not. Being a Black child is to be constantly in danger. As soon as a Black baby exists, they are immediately in danger, and how much danger depends on where and how the child is born. Those murdered children did not know that by simply existing in the world, they were always in danger of being removed, not by natural forces, but because of dangerous ideologies that incite violence in people. Like the children of the Atlanta child murders, Baby Promise of Monroe Gwynn's Promise was not aware of the violence his birth bred. When a Black child, it's as if the world responds to the event violently. Baby Promise is the embodiment of one of the worst acts of horror that Black bodies almost routinely experience: rape. What makes Baby Promise's origin even more dangerous is that Promise is the product of an interracial rape. When Jo constructs a new narrative for this mixed-race child, she is participating in the violent act of erasing half of Promise's identity. What this highlights is how Black children are not protected in acts of violence, and even when experiencing it, they can be owned by whiteness. This novel doesn't offer readers much in the way of justice, but promise possibly never being aware that his body was claimed by a white girl after a tornado could be seen as a bleak justice. That's usually the tone of these short stories and novels by Southern writers, specifically those read during this course. Justice is rare, and if it does occur, it's at the end of a double-edged sword. In the case of the Atlanta child murders, though there were arrests and a man sits in jail still for the murders of 2 children, the other 22 cases were just closed. And those families were expected to accept that as justice. Black children are not afforded the same level of care and concern in death because their lives are seen as easily discarded and forgotten. In reality, 2 families received justice where 22 others had to just accept that their children were recognized at all. When children become responsible for such things like extreme grief, living through trauma, and witnessing it, like the surviving siblings of the murdered children of the Atlanta child murders, Southern literature provides examples of what can happen. Suicide. In Black death, there is ritual. And the Atlanta child murders brought one of those rituals to light, the knowing that Black people are the only people responsible for restoring the honoring of the fallen to the fallen. Like Trees Walking examines these rituals of Black death. Paul's family owns and operates a morgue, which makes them responsible for giving honor to the dead. Black people have to carry this immeasurable weight on their spirits each time someone is murdered in the community. There's a collective mourning that takes place when the life of any Black person is taken, but the mourning that takes place when a child is murdered is arguably heavier than when an adult is killed. Paul, a young man himself, couldn't handle the responsibility and commit suicide, which isn't uncommon for Black people in grief. Although Black people fought to be given the space to have responsibility for themselves, this level of responsibility becomes unbearable for Paul. Instead of being a badge of honor, it is a fatal experience. What these works all seem to assert in one way or another is that the Black child is a myth. There is no Black childhood. There is no being blind to white terrorism. There is no escaping violence. See, if a Black child isn't being traumatized by whiteness, they are being traumatized by Black adults who were in their childhood. A Black child isn't always safe from violence in their own home and even made of violence. Each work illustrates how a Black child bears witness to an act of violence that will reshape their interior. It may harden the child, it may kill the child, or it may numb the child. But what is assured is that the child will change drastically. Sadly, it seems that the only thing promised to a Black child in their existence is violence because it was the reality for every child in this text, and even now it would be difficult to find a Black adult who never experienced an act of violence in childhood, no matter how small. The Black child is a myth. It's a falsehood that is only upheld if a child is fiercely sheltered from the world, which is nearly impossible. For Black children to safely experience childhood, they'd first have to be recognized as children.